I haven't seen this past like 2 minutes. I saw the Jacobin thing, and I'm like, I know what this guy's gonna say. Oh God, this is a lot more. I expected something like this with the Varoufakis thing, but now it's you've been lied to about why Ukraine war began. Okay, Russell.
This war is a simple black and white
Whoa, you are loud. You are a loud boy. Fucking get down there. All right, nice.
thing. Either Putin is evil or
Putin.
NATO started
NATO
it. But
started
when
it.
did the war in Ukraine really start? And who really started it? Good day to you, you 5.1 million awakening wonders. Do you know that only 48% of the people that watch these videos are subscribing? So if you ain't subscribing, educating us. This is all over the UK. You can come and see me in Stockport, Ukraine. That doesn't mean that Now, we've been talking about Ukraine for a while because, of course, the entire world is talking about Ukraine. That doesn't mean that the rest of the news has stopped. Doesn't mean that coronavirus and the legislation around it's gone away. Doesn't mean that authoritarianism isn't on the rise in countries.
Can we keep? I wanted to keep on talking about fucking COVID and that. Oh no.
Beyond Russia. But what we really want to understand today is, how did this situation really begin? Of course, you could have what is called infinite regress. Oh, because of Stalin. Oh, because of American colonialism. Because of British imperialism. But a very important time in the escalation of this conflict was 2014. And it's that in particular we're going to talk about today, because it seems to me that when you're talking about the neo-Nazi component, American interventionism, this...
No. People who choose to, I feel like you can actually gauge what someone's about to say and like who someone's about, or what side someone's going to be on by what year they choose. You know, you choose fucking 2014 and not 2008. You want to choose 2008, but not like the year 2003 or 2000. Yeah, I wonder if he's used the Jacobin article that we saw when we opened the video. He's going to say that he's going to describe the Maidan protest as a coup with conjecture rather than evidence. That's my guess. Because that's what Jacobin said.
This was a key episode in the situation we find ourselves in today. Let's have a look at it. Now, obviously...
Or when they choose the Kievan Rus. True. Based. GigaChad. Starting at the 9th century. GigaChad 9th century history enjoyer. Fuck yeah.
What we're offering you is an alternative to mainstream media. To them, the war in Ukraine is a simple situation.
He gives away so much of himself with that sentence. We're the alternative to the mainstream media. In other words, I have to say something different from the mainstream media because otherwise that's my brand gone. Is he a Jacobin reader? He's used Jacobin in the last 2 videos I've watched of him, so to that extent, yeah.
Putin is evil. And then other people counter with the escalation of NATO hostility as to the culpability being on the other side of the fence. Nearly a decade on, the 2014 Revolution of Dignity, as it's known in Ukraine, remains one of the more widely misunderstood episodes of recent history. Yet understanding it is critical to understanding the ongoing standoff over Ukraine, which can largely be traced back to this polarizing event. Like today's Russia-NATO tensions, more broadly at the heart of the Maidan protests was the push by...
What? Was Russia-NATO tension at the heart of the Maidan protests? It's not as if like... So we've read reports of this in the past, and that fact that like between the US and Russia, NATO didn't come up in the talks, like barely ever, if even ever. Maidan protest. Sorry, pronunciation. Fuck you. Like, no. Wait, where is this coming from? This was over an EU trade deal. This was over Yanukovych juggling the EU and Russia, giving a speech and assuring his audience and assuring the public that he was leaning towards the EU. Then he got offered a $15 billion deal from Russia, switches over to Russia, and then triggers off the protests. It wasn't a NATO thing. Fuck. All right.
by some Western governments, especially in the United States, to isolate Russia by supporting the integration of peripheral parts of the former Soviet Union into European and Atlantic institutions, and Moscow's pushback against what it saw as an encroachment on its sphere of influence. Presumably, although it was much protested against, at the time of the war in Vietnam, you wouldn't be able to say, hey, this is a proxy war. It's no one's business what goes on in Vietnam. We now know and are able to understand it was a proxy war between communists from Russia, American colonialism, and that's like completely appreciated and fully understood. At the time, even though there was a massive countercultural civil rights movement that was opposed to that war because of the draft and numerous other reasons, there still would have been a mainstream narrative that was like, we absolutely have to do this in Vietnam. I like even having it explained to me that there was an intention between America and Europe to create institutions in former Soviet nations, because for 50 years, the Cold War had been the dominant threat to global stability.
Is this pressure, I think, involves the EU and Russia competing for a deal with Ukraine? And what else? Like the US saying that Ukraine might have a future in NATO, but definitely not now?
And it was a truly polarizing event. A lot of you have mentioned in the comments below about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how when Russia were willing to put missiles in Cuba, how that very nearly brought about the Third World War, and drawing comparisons between the militarization of Ukraine and other surrounding former Soviet states and that event, how it is.
This is when they talk about the militarization of Ukraine, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Is this like the biolab conspiracy? Like, I don't know. I don't know why so many people, like, what do they mean by that? Is there actually, like, as far as I know, there was like aid given to Ukraine by the Americans since, like, I don't know, the 1990s for all kinds of things to help with, like, I don't know, efforts against drug trafficking or like homelessness and shit like that, like all kinds of like civil society stuff. Does he mean like especially since we're at 2014, which is like what, 6 years after Russia used that Sevastopol port? Is that, I'm not even saying that right? Used that port in Crimea to attack Georgia. When the port was in Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, meaning that Russia was using Ukrainian territory to launch attacks against Georgia, knowing full well that naval retaliation from Georgia would have hit Ukraine.
In essence, a hostile encroachment upon Russian sovereignty. That is one component of this complex and sophisticated.
It's pronounced Sevastopol or Sevastopol or Sevastopol just sounds like a really Western pronunciation. Sevastopol. Sevastopol. I don't know.
Geopolitical issue. A major turning point in the US-Ukraine-Russia relationship was the 2014 violent and unconstitutional ouster of President Viktor Yanukovych. Elected in 2010, a vote heavily split between Eastern and Western.
This here, violent, well, okay, there was violence on partly because Putin urged Yanukovych to use police force and quite a few people died. But also, the unconstitutional thing is still up for discussion. Like, this is a debate within the Ukrainian legal system about whether it was unconstitutional. In any case, like, every single person in the Rada, including Yanukovych's own deputies, voted to have him out.
In Ukraine. In 2014, Yanukovych was taking his second crack at the Ukrainian presidency. Once in power, Yanukovych's rule was again marred by widespread corruption, authoritarianism, and for some, an uncomfortable friendliness to Moscow, which had made no secret of its backing him in the previous election. The fact that Ukraine
What is this in chat? Causes several mass famines in Ukraine, insists for decades they deserved it, erases Ukrainian history and claims it as Russian history, true, sends Ukrainians off to die in the millions in both world wars and takes the credit, causes worst nuclear disasters in history on Ukrainian soil and covers it up, brutally crushes several attempts at Ukrainian sovereignty prior to 1991, constantly meddles in Ukrainian politics after invading, and invades Crimea and funds a partisan uprising. Yeah. Spitting. Later declaring war. Right.
Ukraine was starkly divided between a more Europe-friendly Western centre and a more pro-Russia East, the same lines that largely determined the election, only added to the complication. Ukraine relied on cheap gas from Russia, but a plurality of the country, not crucially an absolute majority, still wanted European integration. You can see that this is already complex. There was a leader in place that many believe to be corrupt. There are territorial divisions. There are alliances between former regimes, the former Soviet regime in the form of Russia, a desire for European integration. So this war, this conflict is occurring amid a degree of complexity. It's already, just reading this, not as simple as, that Putin, he's a bastard. He might be a bastard. None of this, of course, is an attempt to negate the transgressions made by Russia under Putin. That seems to be a foregone and understood aspect of this conflict. It's simply to point out that due to the nature of geopolitics, due to the nature of globalization, due to the nature of centralization, you're going to be dealing with a lot of interconnected issues. It's not going to be, oh,
yeah, wasn't there like a Ukrainian candidate to, who got poisoned? Oh, well.
Oh no, there's some baddies. What are we going to do?
Where is it? There's like a lot of articles about it. Viktor Yushchenko. Yeah. Oh, well. Yeah.
Do. I think that whenever you find yourself supporting the intentions of a particular
Yushchenko. Right.
group in a way that lacks nuance, you are beholden to investigate your own position. Like, why is it that I believe that Putin's just evil and there's no discussion to be had? Stand with Ukraine. Of course, stand with Ukraine. Of course, don't bomb people. Of course, don't kill people. Those are some issues we can immediately agree on. War and violence are wrong and bad. But if we're truly going to find an amenable solution, we're going to have to understand the nature of the problem. His political career was...
I just wonder, like, what is the... It's like a kind of like a fundamentalism of appearing to be nuanced, right? It's not like when we opposed Western intervention in Libya and Iraq. Can you imagine, like, the Russell Brand version at the time being, now come on, right? Let's just consider for a moment the behavior of Saddam Hussein prior to the invasion. Like, what? I don't know why. Like, if you give these people like any anti-Western narrative, any like anti-NATO narrative, they will just fucking gobble it up like fucking catnip. Like, they will just fucking go into it. They'll just dive in and their face will be covered in like, yeah, it's like centrist brain rot. Fucking hell.
Caught in the same bind.
Ugly Pie with the tier 1 sub, 10 out of 10 impression. Well, if I do say so myself.
With his party formerly allied to Vladimir Putin's own United Russia Party, his pro-Russia base wanted to see closer relations with its neighbour. But the oligarchs, who were the real reason he'd gotten anywhere near the presidency, were financially entangled with the West. And they feared competition to their grip on the country from across the Russian border. All the while, two geopolitical powers in the form of Washington and Moscow hoped to use these cleavages, grow up, to draw the country into their respective orbits. Yeah, of course, because the centralized powers of America and Russia do need to simplify the narrative because they have a solution and an agenda in mind. The only way you could actually get anywhere with this is to let go of an outcome, right? You'd have to go, all we want is peace and for people not to be harmed and for ordinary people to have as much power in their own lives as possible. As soon as you go, I'd like it if the outcome was financially beneficial to the United States of America, or I'd like it if we were able to control these resources, or it would be good for us politically to control that territory. As long as that's in the mix, As long as the serpent of self-will is intermingled with your requirement for particular outcomes, you are never going to achieve a peaceful outcome. You will achieve a malign and self-interested one. The backdrop to the 24th...
I don't understand this. Like, just because Americans and Europeans had like a political interest, like this happens all the time. Everyone in Europe basically didn't want Trump to become president for the same reason. Yeah, of course, when you have a country, like, it's in the, like, people might have different preferences over what happens in that country, like next door to you, right? I don't see what's controversial about that and why you can't have peace if, like, the people in the EU want a more pro-EU government in Ukraine. It's what he's not going to get at, though, I don't think, because that's when they go into conspiracy theory, is when they try to show that the United States or Europe tried to coerce a regime change out of Ukraine. That's the part that they can't do. But you see how they've like dropped enough seeds for you to think that, though, right? Dreadhead with the gifted tier 1 sub, thank you very much. Almost on a hype train. Imagine what could happen. The backdrop of the 2014 coup and annexation cannot be understood without looking at the US strategy to open Ukrainian markets to foreign investors and give control of its economy to giant multinational. Well, first of all, this is like, I don't know why they keep on mentioning the US when it was also the EU who wanted to strike a deal. Like, I don't know. What the fuck is this? The fact that Yanukovych like leaned towards a deal that would have opened Ukrainian markets to Russian investors. I don't know why. Like, why is it? I don't understand this kind of like, yeah, you have a resource-rich country in a strategical place that is beneficial to both sides. It's all these things that like don't excuse it. First of all, definitely don't excuse an invasion, that don't make the West look like any more sinister for what they were doing. When they talk about the backdrop of 2014 as well, is like, I hate that they just don't mention that Russian desire to take Crimea is older than 2014. It's older than any kind of popular unrest. When Yanukovych was at his height, remember this article? This fucking harpoon. Where is it? Yeah, that it was conventional wisdom at the time of like 2010, 2011 that Moscow wanted to annex Crimea. And that they had already made moves on Crimea as early as 2003 with their attempt to claim the island of Tuzla. That was 2003, wasn't it? Yeah. Like what did something happen in 2003 with regards to the EU and the US and Ukraine that made Russia do that? Is that what we're going to go with? Did anyone make Russia want to annex Crimea in like 2010? I don't think so.
In coup and annexation cannot be understood without looking at the US strategy to open Ukrainian markets to foreign investors and give control of its economy to giant multinational corporations. What? America? Trying to open up new markets? Hi, how dare you? How could you even? What evidence? When is there previous history of America trying to open up markets to global conglomerates? Oh yeah, always, all the time, with every single war there's ever been.
Damn, not really applying that that enlightened giga brain nuance when it comes to criticizing America, are you, Russell Brand, eh?
Key tool for this has been the internet.
It's almost as if he is just as sheepish and just as magnetically fucking drawn to fall in line with whatever narrative he thinks will work with his audience as well. It's almost as if he is just as much of an uncritical fucking soy jack shithead that he accuses like the mainstream of being.
International.
Just so you know, right? If your position is the mainstream media thinks that, so I will think the opposite, actually makes you like more of a fucking sheep, right? You know, you understand that, right? At the very least, the mainstream media is held up to some kind of standard. They can't just lie about fucking everything. Like, people get fired for lying. People get fired for making up quotes. People get fired and have their careers destroyed for falsely attributing quotes to themselves rather than the other people. Like, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that people think that's really, I know that some people in chat, one or two of you, think that's really like unsettling, or think that's like, what? Is anyone going to prove to me that alternative media has any equivalent, has anything holding it to account?
Monetary Fund, which leverages aid loans to push governments to adopt policies friendly to foreign investors. These groups like IMF, they all pose as like these neutral agencies, but they've all got funding, they've all got an agenda, they're all working in collusion with corporate interests. We will lend you some money, go on, as long as you keep talking, do exactly what we tell you. The IMF is funded by and represents Western...
And now they're just giving standard like IMF, like economic imperialism points. Oh, okay.
Financial capital.
What? So, like, the fact that the IMF offered money to Ukraine and what, the Kremlin also offered money to Ukraine, what's the difference here? Yeah, this is, you can definitely say this is two imperialist powers scrambling over one country. Yeah, bidding over one country. It's only that one of those imperialist powers also, in their negotiations, involved military operations. Right? I think that's the big difference. You've got economic imperialism on one side, and you got economic imperialism plus military force on the other. I'm kind of skewing, you know, kind of getting skewed a little bit.
And governments, and has been at the forefront of efforts to reshape economies around the world for decades. Reshape economies. That's take over sovereign nations. We just like to reshape your economy. Reshape economies around the world for decades, often with disaster.
What the fuck is this article? They can't not do this. They can't talk about the specifics of Ukraine and Russia on the terms of what's been happening historically in Ukraine and Russia, because it doesn't work for them. Like, the more you know about what happened in Ukraine and Russia, the worse Russia looks. And the more incentive Ukraine has, and the Ukrainian majority has, which it was a majority, it still is a majority, to want to lean west. They can't do it without talking about fucking Yemen and Bolivia and shit. Like, they can't do it. They're incapable. How is this the critical alternative?
Results. The civil war in Yemen and the coup in Bolivia both followed a rejection of IMF terms. Oh, what a coincidence. Are you slowly awakening to the realities of geopolitics and the way that it is underwritten by
Oh, yeah. But from watching your channel, Russell Brand, from watching your career, I am definitely awakening to the fact that the IMF and America likes to push the hands of other countries. Yeah, that's news to me. My mind is like, I'm having to constantly shrink the dimensions of my camera because my head keeps expanding as I'm saying this.
Outcomes of corporate interest. In Ukraine, the IMF had long planned to implement a series of economic reforms to make the country more attractive.
What is he going to mention that this was also in the interest? Okay, and I don't like the EU or the IMF. Okay, I've got plenty of issues there with what they do in Africa and all that shit. But like, I'm sorry, like, what the fuck? Is he going to mention that this was also in the interest of the Ukrainians? Because their balancing act between the EU and the Eurasian Customs Agreement was not doing anything for the Ukrainian people, that their incomes were stagnating for like over a decade.
To investors. Not the people who live there, investors. In 2013, after early steps to integrate with the West, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych turned against these changes and ended trade integration talks with the European Union. Months before his overthrow, he restarted economic negotiations with Russia in a major snub to the Western economic sphere. By then, the nationalist protests were heating up that would go on to topple his government.
Hey, what was it? It's actually an important one. Months before his overthrow, he restarted negotiations with Russia. Yeah. Okay.
The nationalist protests were
this is true. Okay, we're actually talking about Ukraine now. What I don't think they mention is that that he lied to the Ukrainian people. He gave speeches indicating his support for the EU deal and his intentions to make a deal with the EU.
Up that would go on to topple his government. Okay, so this dude was starting to snub Western and European interests in favour of Russian interests. Whether you believe that's right or wrong, that's up for you to determine and decide.
Fuck you, Russell. Why won't you mention? I know it's okay. He doesn't know. For to give him credit, he's a fucking idiot. And anything that's not in those 2 articles that he read, he doesn't know. He doesn't know that Yanukovych lied to the public about his intentions to side with the EU before turning over to Russia.
While picking through this complex information. But what it starts to make me think is the kind of sanctimony and piety of Western support of the situation in Ukraine has to be queried a little bit. Stand with Ukraine! Stand with them! Because there's a little wrinkle in this where people were trying to set Ukraine...
in the Second World War, this guy would be fucking invasion of Poland, and this guy would be making fucking videos, doing little wireless recordings about how Poland has like a fascist government. That's what he would be doing. Oh, stand with Poland, stand with Europe. They actually have quite a lot in common with old Adolf. They're not so sweet themselves. They're not. You could say, sorry, I'll do Russell Brand. You could say that they was now angels, though, innit? You could say that the Polish was now angels. Why is that? Stand with Poland. Fuck that for a laugh. Yeah, that's what he would say. Fucking hell.
Up so that foreign...
Which is actually what quite a lot of upper class and like right-wing people in Europe were saying.
Investment opportunities would be presented. They weren't like, oh God, what can we do for Ukrainian people? If Ukrainian people are helped, that's a byproduct of their financial interests. His ouster came after months of protests led in part by far-right extremists.
Led in part. Oh God. Oh shit. In what part? Oh no. Oh God. Led in what part? So as far as I know, the Azov battalion, which is where the kind of like the big neo-Nazi thing is, there are 2,000 people in the Azov battalion at most, and 20% of them are neo-Nazis. Like, what a fucking smear. Shit. It doesn't even like, okay, let's say it was a majority, 10 to 20%. Let's say it was a majority of far-right extremists. Like, none of that justifies an invasion.
Weeks before his ouster, an unknown party leaked a phone call between US officials discussing who should and shouldn't be part of the new government and finding ways to seal the...
This is the most dishonest sentence. Weeks before his ouster, an unknown party leaked a phone call between US officials discussing who should and shouldn't be part of the new government and finding ways to seal the deal. So this is relating to a conversation between... it was Victoria Nuland and Piat, between 2 US officials. And if you look through this entire transcript, this is the bit they'll cling on, is they are just saying that one candidate would be ideal for us. That's it. This is the equivalent of fucking Jeremy Corbyn being caught, or let's say Boris being caught in a recording saying, yeah, it'd probably be better if like Biden got elected because Trump's like a dipshit, you know? Like that's basically, it's the equivalent of this. And the guy that they're talking about, the person who they thought should be leading the new government was already the leader of the opposition. The leader of the largest party after Yanukovych is the leader of the opposition against Yanukovych. But if you read this paragraph not knowing that, you'd think this was a coup, right? You'd think this is the US intervening in the selections of the Ukrainian government.
Deal. After the ouster, a politician the officials designated as the guy even...
See, this is it. The guy, look at this, the way they've said this. The politician, the officials designated. They didn't designate them. They just expressed preference towards the already existing leader of the opposition. Oh God, I wish I could find the quote. Where is it? What was it they said? It would be. It was after they said "fuck the EU" at one point. That was a funny bit. It was one of these. What was the guy's name? Clit. This guy's name is Klitschko. Imagine being called Clit. No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko's been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up whatever meeting they've got, and he's probably talking to guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management, okay? So this is just about talks. I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea, okay? One of three main opposition leaders. Complicated electron here. And that's the deputy prime minister. But they even mentioned he was an opposition leader. Yeah. They're just talking about who they're just talking about who their preferences would be to deal with after the revolution, or after the uprising. But this paragraph makes it look like a coup. That they designated as the guy, the leader of the opposition.
Became prime minister. Okay, so there was this insurrection that occurred, whether you agree with it or not, because you maybe think that old Yanukovych weren't the world's greatest guy, and the chances are that he probably bloody well wasn't. The fact was there was Western intervention in the government of Ukraine.
Where's the intervention? He hasn't shown intervention.
As political turmoil engulfed the country in the lead up to 2014, the US was fueling anti-government sentiment through mechanisms like USAID and National Endowment for Democracy, NED, just as they had done in 2004. In December 2013, Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary of the State for European Affairs and longtime regime change advocate, said that the US government had spent $5 billion promoting democracy in Ukraine since 1991.
This is again. Now, what they're going to miss out, $5 billion since 1991, which is not much. I'm sorry.
Promoting democracy.
What, a period of, excuse me, nearly 15 years. Now, the conjecture that they're going to use is they're going to say that the money went to the revolution, that it went to the Maidan protests.
Whose democracy? For who?
Is it Maidan or Maidan? I think it's Maidan, isn't it?
It's like, oh God, we've just got to help Ukrainian people. Come on, let's promote democracy. Do you get anything out of this? Oh God, I suppose.
Oh, and he's going to compare it to Iraq, isn't it? He's going to compare it to the promotion of democracy in Iraq or the promotion of democracy in Libya, isn't he? I can see it in his brain. Is he going to do it? Russell, behave yourself.
Down the line, there could be these political advantages and these economic advantages, but as long as democracy's okay, if you care about democracy so much, do it in your own bloody country. The NED is a key organisation in the network of American soft power that pours $170 million a year into organisations dedicated to defending or installing US-friendly regimes. So this is a thing that goes on. You can't simply just absorb the crap that flows out of mainstream corporate media. You can't just watch that and go...
The money was allocated to what? The elections, anti-corruption, and to develop the energy sector. This is like a very normal thing to do. If a country wants to start leaning towards you, then it's in your interest to provide a degree of aid to facilitate their ability to do to engage in economic relations with you. Normal if you're a couper. Yeah. Well, she even says we didn't spend any money supporting the Maidan. So if they're using her word, they should probably include that part. It's harder to do business. Yeah, it's harder to do business with an economy that's been stagnant since the fall of the Soviet Union, which Ukraine more or less was.
Oh no, Putin's bad. Oh no, there's a whole set of agencies dedicated to destabilizing unfriendly regimes and installing regimes that are friendly to American business interests. One thing that I've thought for a while is British colonization was all done very upfront. Dun, 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 we're here on behalf of the Queen to nick your country. And then we realized you can't do that. People don't like it. We have to give all the countries back to the people we'd nicked them off. So America was like, what if we never actually overtly steal a country? We just replace all of their structures, profit from their minerals and business interests, and nobody needs to know what's happening. Now, the true nations are...
I think Russell should be deplatformed. I'm sorry. Like, this is so fucking dangerous what he's doing. Like, or at least just put a big fucking RT stamp on all his videos for Ukraine. He can talk about other shit. He can do his homeopathy or whatever the fucking, even the COVID shit. I don't care. Like, this is a war, and Russell is like lying about it. And actually, public opinion on this side of the world actually is quite important when it comes to a war, because it determines like how far our politicians will go to support one side or the other, or to assist in aid, to donate to refugees, things like that. Like this is all plays a part in it. Like I'm sorry, they need to, okay, I don't like deplatforming. It's bad, right? They should just put a fucking stamp of Stalin's face on Russell Brand and just have it hovering around through his entire video. They should just do that. Or maybe like if he behaves himself, they can put like a Putin mask. Your side is so weak that you have to ban the other side to even have a chance. What, like McCarthy? Like Winston Churchill in the Second World War? Say it then. Say Winston Churchill was weak in the Second World War, majorly based. Say that Roosevelt was weak in the Second World War. Say that McCarthy was weak in the Cold War.
Are the corporate nations. Now the true interests and powers are the corporate powers, and the governments are merely the facilitators of their interests. Discuss. Comments below. The Washington Post's David Ignatius once wrote that the organization functions by doing in public what the CIA used to do in private. Wow. Destabilizing governments and installing friendly regimes.
Stop saying that, Russell. Okay, in fairness to the article, the people who wrote the article know what they're doing, right? Because they know that they can only put in, look how this works. Okay, this is how people who just state the facts operate, right? So wait, we're at 1318. Okay, so where are we with the quotes? Okay. Weeks before his ouster, an unknown party leaked a phone call between the US officials discussing who should and shouldn't be part of the new government. This is fine, okay? This is like me saying, I think Biden should be the president of America. Like that, yeah, or Bernie Sanders, right? I think it's a very normal thing for politicians to do, right? Trump, like when he said, I think Boris Johnson should be the prime minister and not Corbyn, that's okay. He's allowed to say that. That's not illegal. It's not even immoral. Just give your opinion. But you notice how they say this. They stay within the lines because they know, they're mainstream journalists. They're held to a standard. They can't just lie. This is a very good lesson for one or two people in chat. This is how they do it. There's no lie here, but they are leading you in a very particular direction. And then what's the next one? Finding ways to seal the deal as well as what? Yeah, negotiate with the people who you're expecting to get into power. So they have this, very carefully worded, and then you have designated, like I guess Donald Trump designated Boris Johnson as the guy. Okay. And Boris became prime minister. Okay. That's all true. Spent money to promote democracy. Okay. Yeah. I won't say exactly where the money went. Okay. And then Russell Brand takes all that because he's not mainstream media, because he can lie and not get in trouble. And then he gets to say this.
They used to do in private. Wow. Destabilizing governments and installing friendly regimes.
Neither of those things were worded in the... Why does he think that? Neither of those things were mentioned. That the West was destabilizing governments and... Wait, what was the other one?
And installing friendly regimes.
No, neither of these things happened. They didn't install anyone. The Ukrainian people installed a new government, right? the destabilizing and the installation of a new government, neither of those were done by the United States in Ukraine. And nothing he's read even says that's what happened. But they know that people like Russell Brand are fucking idiots. So they get to stay on their side of the aisle. They get to do the mainstream thing where you just tell a bunch of truths in a very, or half truths in a very like carefully curated way. And then your audience fills in the blanks for you. And in this case, the alternative media guy, Russell Brand, gets to say the lie that you couldn't say yourself. That's how they do it. Duped, Russell.
The NED targets governments who oppose US military or economic policy, stirring up anti-government opposition. While this is still not conclusive about why the war in Ukraine is happening, it is important information. That's not nothing. All of that's not, that's all irrelevant. It's just Putin's evil. He's the new Hitler, is what he is. That is an attempt to borrow an existing narrative, to flatten out, iron out nuance and prevent you saying, God, I don't know that we really understand what's happening here. The solution probably involves a wide range of things, like NATO not encroaching on that territory, like America ain't going to intervene in the democratic process of sovereign nations, which America aren't able to do because all of their relationships with corporations, the very corporations that fund the two political parties in America, are contingent on pledges of that nature being made. Oh, we can predict that profits will go up this much because we're going to have access to these resources. We can predict your profits are going to go up this much because there's going to be a war and we're going to be selling it. You know, this is where reality takes place. There are two economies. There are two realities. There's the reality that we are fed in order to keep us compliant and docile. Then there's the reality that underscores that, the actual reality, the reality that they don't trust us with.
The actual reality that the Americans orchestrated a coup and then installed a new leader. That's the apparent reality. Oh God, look how fucking convinced of himself he is. Oh my God. Like, this is the worst thing. It's just like that he just took that, like those little pieces of conjecture, and has just created out of nothing, basically, this entire alternative story that isn't backed up by any evidence. It's so amazing, like how that, like the conspiratorial mind works.
The reality that we're not informed about, the reality that you have to take responsibility both on an inward trajectory and an outward trajectory to understand. You have to
and then he proselytizes about how you become a better person if you, like, I guess, take the same dog shit approach that he just did.
Yourself familiar with that, because you're not going to receive that information elsewhere, and it's absolutely vital. The US involvement was part of a campaign aimed at exploiting the divisions in Ukrainian society to push the country into the US sphere of influence, pulling it out of the Russian sphere. So no doubt there was complexity in Ukraine.
So when they come up with this, like exploiting divisions, first of all, I don't know why he keeps on saying about the US when it was like a lot more to do with the EU at that time, but you could also say that the Ukrainian public were exploiting the division between the EU and Russia, playing the two off each other to get a better deal out of one and the other. That's why the all or nothing approach, which deviated from like each side, the EU and Russia both having like a kind of equal share in Ukraine's economy, the all or nothing approach led to an offer of better deals from both sides. That's why Yanukovych got offered the 15 billion from Russia, because he was indicating a lean towards the EU. And the same way that the EU upped their offer because it was going to be all or nothing between them and Russia. So, and then you can also say that Russia kind of exploited the tension as well by exploiting Yanukovych's very corrupt behavior. So again, like, but if you've got the Russell Brand brain and your mind is US corporations and US military and CIA, FBI, fucking BBW are just they're the ones who are going in just maliciously orchestrating coups and trying to influence regime change under the counter, like FBI, CIA, DSL, yeah, all that shit. Okay. But Russell Brand, just like that word just makes him fucking cum. And then he can go back to rambling about Libya, about Yemen, about corrupt fucking lizard brain American corporation. Yeah,
the US sphere of influence, pulling it out of the Russian sphere. So no doubt there was complexity in
No
Ukraine
doubt.
prior to that, but these fissures were exploited. Why? Not to help Ukrainian people, in order to create economic opportunity. In the aftermath of the overthrow, Russia illegally annexed Crimea from
True.
Ukraine, so that was bad, in part to secure a major naval base from
Well, I suppose that was bad, right? I suppose it was a bit of a exploited. Thanks, Russell. Both sides, my guy. That fucking epic slam dunk rant about the evil American billionaires. Russia illegally annexes Crimea. Well, that's bad. Anyway, US corporations, right?
the new Ukrainian government. The New York Times and Washington Post both admitted the role the US played in these events. Why? Why would you? Because it creates complexity.
Well, because even if you mention the role, which is US US officials stating their preference for Ukrainian leaders after the fact, is enough to make every fucking milk brain on this side of in this fucking hemisphere think it was a coup. I don't even know. I would be scared to tell the public certain facts about Ukraine just because I know that they would get the entire wrong impression. That it would go through the fucking dumb fuck filter, and then there'd be you know. Also, just because it's not that significant. It's not. The fact that the United States provided aid to Ukraine, a crippled economy after the Soviet Union, and the fact that US officials expressed a preference for the opposition leader, neither of these are significant facts. They don't change anything. It's actually what you would expect to happen. Uniquai for the tier 1 sub. Thank you very much. All right.
US media, this critical moment in history is completely cleansed of US influence, erasing a critical step on the road to the current war. That's key, huh? The 2014 revolution in Ukraine was an enormously complicated affair, yet for most Western observers, many of its basic, well-documented facts have been either excised to push a simplistic black and white narrative or cast as misinformation.
Imagine if the press was all writing articles about the United Kingdom election in 2019 between Boris Johnson and Corbyn. And then I wrote an article about everyone. Do you guys not think it's a bit suspicious that none of these articles, that no one in the media is talking about the fact that Trump designated Boris Johnson as the guy to become prime minister? And America gives money to the UK. They do trade why is no one talking about that American imperialism and orchestrating the election of Boris Johnson and that? This is the equivalent. Couldn't possibly be because leaders of other countries expressing a preference for political leaders in a different country is not a game changer in any way. I'm sorry.
Propaganda, like the crucial role of the far right in the revolution. In truth, the Maidan Revolution remains a messy event that isn't easy to categorise, but is far from what Western audiences have been led to believe. It's a story of liberal, pro-Western protesters driven by legitimate grievances, but largely drawn from only one half of a polarised country, entering a temporary marriage of convenience with the far right to carry out an insurrection against a corrupt authoritarian president.
Are they going to mention that Putin urged Yanukovych to use brutal police force against the protesters? It was kind of like a turning point.
That's a complicated plot, right? Okay, so you've got a polarized nation.
And the idea of the far right leading this protest is also completely unsubstantiated.
You've got progressive pro-Western protesters, but they're making a marriage of convenience with far right Nazis. That's so complicated. The sort of ideas that start to appear in my head when I hear that level of complexity is, why would you centralise such a diverse group of interests? Who benefits from having one centralised government? Why are we not having libertarian, anarcho-syndicalist systems of government where communities are made as small as possible, not as large as possible, as small as can possibly be effective? What is the advantage of scaling? Who benefits from power being centralised? Those are the kind of questions I would be asking. The tragedy is that it's...
Yeah. Oh god. You know what? Even as someone who would like identify quite strongly with like anarcho-syndicalism, I'm just like, yeah, he's fucking high. I was like, we're unfortunately like, first of all, if you want to be an anarcho-syndicalist or like, you would want to talk about building from the ground up, in spite, in spite of what like the EU is doing. You don't just turn up to a fucking EU trade deal and be like, "Excuse me, mate. Why isn't this more of a libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, anarcho-syndicalist, DMT kind of a deal? Why even not that? You what, bruv? Fuck me. The tragedy is that it served largely to empower literal neo-Nazis. Okay. I think a lot of this is just Russian. Like this is like so Kremlin backed as well because like the significance of the Nazism thing is that Russian nationalism hinges like so hard on not hinge like Russian nationalism. Like a very important feature of Russian nationalism is the glory in the fact that they defeated the Nazis, right? Which isn't entirely true. Like Stalin literally begged Roosevelt for help during the Second World War, but all the same, the Russians like to say that they were the ones responsible for the war ending. And that's why if you can make your opponents out to be Nazis, if you can associate them with Nazis in any way, you're good to go. They're fair game. It's like a very effective like Russian propaganda tactic.
Serve to largely empower literal neo-Nazis. If there's one thing we can agree on, is there? That we don't want Nazis? Can we agree on that? No matter where you are on the
Why don't you talk about how many Nazis are in the Ukrainian are represented in the Ukrainian government? Like, do they even have a seat? Wait, how many neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian parliament? I think it's like, because it's definitely not going to be as much as there were in Greece. I think it's 0, isn't it? Yeah. How much of the vote do they have? Like, yeah, so like Putin would have more of an excuse to attack the UK, like the trucker protests. Yeah, they shouldn't have. Yeah, yeah. You should. Yeah, they shouldn't have attacked the trucker protests because there were some Nazis there. They should have attacked the trucker protests because they were fucking idiots with impossible demands who couldn't tie their shoelaces and were like dribbling all over the place. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be like Britain getting invaded because the BNP have like 2 council seats. Yeah.
political scale, while enacting only the goals of the Western.
Svoboda is the Nazi part. Okay, so let's see. Polling Ukraine. See how much of the vote they won. I think it's gonna be less than like 1%, isn't it? They had 1 seat in the Rada. Their membership is 15,000. What's their election result? What share of the popular vote did they get? Oh, well, 1.62%. Damn, I underestimated them. They got 1.62%. Wait. BNP vote share 2010. I think 2010 was their most successful. They got 500,000 votes. What's that percentage? 1.9. Oh God. Oh damn. Britain in 2010 was more liable for Russian invasion than the United Kingdom, than Ukraine. The BNP had 1.9% and Svoboda at their height had 1.62. Holy shit. Fuck me, dude.
Powers that opportunistically lent their support, among which was the geopolitical equivalent of a predatory payday loan. So they offer them financial solutions based on compliance, and one could argue that the current war is in
based on popular support. That's what he means by compliance.
Part a result of the conditions that were set out here. It's a story tragically common in post-Cold War Europe of a country maimed and torn apart when its political and social divisions were used and wrenched further apart in the tussle of great power rivalry. And the Western failure to understand it has led us to a point where Washington continues to recklessly involve itself in a...
there is this one here, though. Okay, you could say, well, even then, though, look. In 2012, they had 10% of the popular vote under Yanukovych in the parliamentary elections, but then it drops to 4 after 2014. And then 2019 is down to 2. Like, they're a shrinking force in Ukraine. Like, what? Bro, mate. Yeah, they were dropping. Shit, dude. And yeah, by 2019, by 2014, they were gone. Yeah, annihilated.
Place full of shadowy motives, shifting allegiances, and where little is what it seems on the surface. None of this is to say that Putin's invasion is justified, but calling it unprovoked distracts attention from the US's own contribution to this disastrous outcome. The US ignored warnings from both Russia and US officials that a major conflagration could erupt if the US continued its path, and it shouldn't be surprising that one eventually did. Now, as the world once again inches towards the brink of nuclear omnicide, it's more important than ever for Western audiences to understand and challenge their own government's role in dragging us all to this point. What I take from this is that we're dealing with a situation of almost unimaginable complexity, with numerous players, with shifting ideals, and no one is free from guilt in the creation of this conflagration. As the writer of this brilliant...
Oh God, my internet brain just go. Is omnicide when this community gets wiped off the face of the earth? Oh God.
Piece
we don't want that.
Suggests all of us should think about our own personal autonomy and perhaps a little more tangentially the type of governments we have and the type of interests that our governments truly represent. The war in Ukraine is a tragedy for the people that are dealing with the reality of conflict, the reality of being displaced, the reality of losing people they love. But to simplify the narrative does them a greater disservice to say simply that Putin is an evil expansionist, even though he may be, while neglecting to include vital information that the political interests and economic interests of our own governments and agencies that are set up primarily to support financial and corporate interests led us in this direction. That there are various ways that this crisis could have been averted if true democracy were allowed to flourish. In our own communities and our own lives, let us insist upon transparency. Let us insist upon democracy. And now we have a situation such as the one in Ukraine. We have to be open and clear about it and resist the attempt to marshal and shepherd us into simplistic thinking, piety, sanctimony, and further foolishness.
No piety and sanctimony from Russell Brand. Nice one. That's funny as fuck, dude. Oh, shit.
Because the people of Ukraine deserve better. And the only way the world will significantly change is if we are able to change.
He's so dependent on those hand gestures because he's been wrong about every single thing here. The prevalence of neo-Nazism in Ukraine, he was wrong about that. He was wrong about US officials like picking the new leader of Ukraine. They just expressed a preference for the guy who was already leader of the opposition and would have won anyway. He was wrong about the aid money being used to orchestrate the coup, the overthrow of Yanukovych. Like, he's been wrong about everything. But he does the hand gestures, so 1.5 million people just gobble, gobble, gobble.
Change our consciousness and our understanding of such complex situations.
Say consciousness.
But that's just what I think. What do you think? You are educating.
I think you're a fucking moron who should like go back to speaking about breathing or whatever the fuck. Thanks, Russell, for what I've been thinking. I totally agree for saying what I've been thinking. It's not black or white, it's complex, and for our governments and media say it is an insult to our intelligence. Why did they take they took a complex issue and simplified it? They took like the tensions between Russia and Europe over like economics and simplified it into a story about United States imperialism orchestrating the overthrow of a democratically elected leader in Ukraine and funding a coup They simplified the story. It's the Israel-Palestine thing for people who claim to be leftist. Quote, it's very complicated. Oh, yeah. It's very complicated. Also, like, all the people who died were terrorists. Yeah, it's exactly. Oh, it's very complicated. But as long as we know that the United States orchestrated a coup that they paid for, and that the the following Ukrainian president was chosen by American diplomat. Oh God. Fuck me. Yeah, this guy's a fucking loser. I'll say it. Russell Brand is a fucking loser. Like, his entire career is just one desperate quest for attention or like higher meaning that fails before he jumps onto something else. He did it with the self-help shit. He did it with the fucking pathetic attempt at being like a left-wing activist thing. And now he's doing it with this basically like Tucker Carlson-esque both sides, but also like very skewed to one side. I remember when he was much better. I mean, he was funny at one point, I think, maybe. I don't know. The don't vote shit. Oh God, that was so bad. What did he do? He said he doesn't vote, bragged about it, had a conversation with Ed Miliband, decided that we should vote to get the Tories out, and then when the election passed, it turned out that he hadn't registered to vote. Yeah, he's a fraud. He's always been a fraud. And every day before he gives his opinion in these videos, the first thing he thinks is not what's true. Is this a reliable source? None of that. Am I being biased? No. He thinks, what does my audience want to hear? That's what he thinks. Every time he gives an opinion, that's what he's thinking. And that is kind of sad. Kind of beta. Somehow this is Katy Perry's fault. Well, most things that go wrong in the world are Katy Perry's fault. We know this.